In the last month of 2022, I read 22 books. Isn't that amazing? Hello, welcome to a Sunny Book Nook. My name is Sunny, and today I am going to be bringing to you my December wrap up. And Happy New Year! It's 2023 now. That's fucking crazy. So let's, talk about all the books I read in December. I did not meet my reading goal for the year, and I'm still considering whether I should do a 2022 stats video where I go through, like some general thoughts about my reading wrap up. Let me know in the comments if you would want to see that video. But anyways, just to finish off the year with, letting you know my reviews of everything that I read, let's get into it. As usual, I will be going through the books I read in the order that I read them throughout the month. Also, 5 out of these 22 books are comics, and each of them, each book is an edition within this comic series, which is one volume, because I was, trying to count each edition as a book, because each comic is a book, to try to contribute to my reading challenge on Goodreads. But alas, we didn't get there, but whatever, who cares? I got to a lot of poetry and, of course, comics and graphic novels and nonfiction this month, as well as my regular sort of, fiction type beat stuff. So the first book that I read, actually, the first book that I finished in the month of December, was The Hard Crowd by Rachel Kushner. This book I really, really loved and is one of my favorite nonfiction books of the year. I still need to film my favorite nonfiction reads of the year video. Actually, I am going to film a video where I go through all of the nonfiction books I've read in the past year. I'm not sure how many that is. I haven't counted it up yet, but I'm thinking about doing a video where I talk about all the nonfiction reads I got to in the order of most widely accessible, most people I think would be interested in, all the way to the most niche interest maybe. And I feel like this sort of falls somewhere in the middle of niche to wide-ranging interests, because the way that Kushner writes is very specific, I think, and the things that she writes about are hyper-specific, but the way that she draws you in is just so beautiful and touching, and the themes of all of her essays that she really gets to, centered around the specificity of her own life, is so deeply compelling. In these essays, we see her talk about her own experiences and her own thoughts on her life, and one of the essays is about the research process and the interview process for which one of the novels she was writing about, and her sort of interest in the Italian autonomous workers movement, and interviewing one of the organizers and of that time in the 70s and 60s or something like that. The first essay in here really drew me in immediately, even though I thought I wouldn't really be that interested. Also, I rated this book 5 stars, by the way. I thought it was phenomenal. After I finished reading it, I was like, this is the type of book that makes me doubt any sort of writing that I do, because it's just so good that I can't imagine any sort of contemporary essay writing that is at this level or better, that could come from me or my peers. It's anyway, the first essay in here I was sort of doubtful about, but then as each essay progressed, I was like, wow, this is really insightful and interesting, because the first essay is about her experiences in the motorcycle racing community in the Southwest region and California, I believe. It was super fascinating. She talks about, being in this sort of toxic relationship with this guy who did the motorcycle racing, and then in this crash that she got into in this race that no longer exists even, and how she grew up in a motorcycle family almost. And then in another essay she talks about working in the bar scene in New York and seeing all of the really hip, cool, popular rock bands that came through. I don't know anything about motorcycles or rock music or any of the things she was talking about, really, except for some of the other stuff. But like those specific scenes were just so interesting. And then she also has an essay in here about visiting a Palestinian refugee camp as as a journalist or writer, and her experiences meeting with these families and how beautiful and heartbreaking that was, and also her thinking about her position as like a journalist. And then there's also an essay in here just like about prison abolition and the idea of like, are prisons necessary, and her thinking through these ideas. A lot of these essays are just very thoughtful and like personal and feminist and intelligent, and again specific in these very niche like topics they delve into. But I still think it just a lot of brilliance all around. So really, really enjoyed this and would definitely recommend it. It was a great book to finish at the very beginning of the month of December. So the next book that I read in the month was Far Sector by N.K. Jemisin, which is a comic book, graphic novel that is the Green Lantern, it's the Green Lantern series, essentially. It follows that set of like comic book characters, like superhero storylines, and we're following this space cop from Earth who comes to this alien planet where no one on this planet experiences emotions, and it's these varying different alien creatures that sort of just coexist together because of the nature of like imperial domination and integration on this one planet. And basically our main character, she sort of is trying to keep the peace after the first murder in like a millennia or like 5 centuries or something has occurred. And so it's all these things start happening. I thought it was very like fast paced and interesting, but there were just some plot holes and just like reasoning within the fantasy science fiction universe that just did not really make sense to me. And I think like the politics of this world, as per usual with N.K. Jemisin's like writing, what is always going to be very intriguing, but I just don't think there was as much depth and complexity there as I necessarily wanted, I guess. I don't know. I think like also that look into the morality of like law enforcement and also emotions causing violence, that idea is what this book is really interrogating, and I appreciate what it's doing, but I feel like of course it's kind of corny and on the nose because it's a comic book, but I don't know. I thought it was okay and I would recommend it because it was like fun, but it wasn't that much of a hard hitter. So I rated it 3 stars. I think the art was pretty cool. It's all like full color, and I think that the like magic and the sort of different belief systems and stuff that the aliens and the different alien creatures she encounters and the worlds that they live in are very brilliant and interesting. And I think that is where the writing really stands out from Jemisin's standpoint. Like, she is so great at these imaginative and fascinating world building elements for different like creatures and constructs within a larger world and how they interact with each other. Like the AI bots, that the AT-ATs, that was really interesting. The cannibalistic plant creatures, all of that was very cool. The drug trafficking sort of plot line, I think there were a lot of different layers to this that were interesting, but it just didn't necessarily grab me by like the throat the way that I don't know, I think I've expected her narratives to, and also graphic novels usually do. So it was a 3-star read, solid. Not like a favorite for sure. And then I'm looking at my computer screen over here for my Goodreads like read shelf. And then I read The Cook by Maylis de Kerangal. I think it was translated from French. It's a very short novella, and it is about a cook, and I rated it like 4 stars, 3.5 stars. It was really sweet and beautiful. It's just following this man as it's from the perspective of someone who is not the man. It's this woman who's like kind of friends with him on and off, and it's about her sort of narrating like his life story and how he got to the place that he was in, and like why he became a chef, how he got there. And of course the French culinary scene is like very, very serious and hardcore, and yeah, it was pretty hopeful and interesting and compelling, but honestly not that memorable, but pretty strongly written and pretty interesting. So I don't know, I don't have that much to say about it. And then I read a poetry collection called Black Queer Hoe by Britteney Black Rose Kapri, which I rated 3 stars, like maybe 2.5 stars. I thought it was fine. There were sort of like screenshots of like tweets throughout the poem, and I was like, yeah, because I feel like this poetry collection just feels like sort of different corroborated tweets put together. I feel like a lot of poetry collections don't really take advantage of the form in that way as much as they should. I don't know. And I also feel like there were just elements of this that were just like corny, and I just didn't really fuck with. I don't know. I don't really have that much to say about this poetry collection, but it was a quick read and it was like solid. I would recommend it for sure, but I just think like it wasn't providing a level of like sophistication necessarily that I kind of want poetry to provide at this point, I guess. And I don't know. But again, I'm not a big poetry reader, and I don't know how much of my criticism is even like legitimate or valid, because I'm not a big poetry reader. That doesn't stop me from reading it though. For example, because the next book that I read in the month was Black Movie by Danez Smith, which I did enjoy. I rated it 4 stars. Danez Smith's writing and poetry, I've been reading it for years. It's great. Smith is a phenomenal poet, and this poetry collection is no different. The theme of like blackness and like film and being captured on camera and horror movies, all of those things sort of tying the collection together. Yeah, I really liked it. There were some poems in there that were very deeply heartbreaking and beautiful and gorgeous, and that's just the strength of the writing and sophistication and the use of form that I'm sort of looking for in poetry, I would say. The next book that I read was a horror novella called One Bloody Thing After the Other by Joey Comeau. It's kind of strange in its vagueness because we sort of alternate some perspectives. It's a creature horror almost. There's a lot of like grotesque eating of flesh and animals and humans, and there's a haunting and a decapitated ghost and these characters that are very strange and removed emotionally and stilted in their interactions. And I found it unsettling and somewhat creepy, but not that scary. I rated it 3 stars. I thought that the writing and the use of form and the way that there were certain words that like at the beginning of each chapter or like at the beginning of each page or something, if I remember correctly, that spelled out a sentence, and I had to flip the pages on the ebook to sort of connect them and understand what the other subliminal message. And I feel like there are some things that I maybe didn't like get perhaps, but I also just think that there is intentionally sort of vague and creepy in that way. So yeah, I thought it was fine. I liked it. I would recommend it if you think that that vibe of horror is up your alley. So the next book that I read was House of Hunger by Alexis Henderson, which is sort of like young adult science fiction or horror, historical fantasy-ish. And I rated it 3 stars. I was kind of like, my Goodreads review of it was okay, because that's how I feel. I think like it was interesting, okay? I was gripped the whole time. I was on the edge of my seat. I was seated. But did I think it was, like, good? No. Did I think it was, like, that well written? not necessarily. Like, basically, we're following this young girl, like 18 years old, around that age. She lives with her brother, who's an addict of some sort, and he's very abusive towards her. And she is really short on cash. And so, in this world, there's these blood maids, and the blood maids sort of are servants to, or are, what's the word? Like, are the maids of these rich people, these rich ladies of the north who drink their blood so that they can replenish their health, essentially. And so our main character goes up north and gets like scouted to be a blood maid, and like she joins this house called the House of Hunger, and she and these other girls are sort of, there's like this competition to be the number one like favored housemaid or blood maid, and the woman who is the House of Hunger lady, there's like this sort of court politics involvement as well, and there's like a sapphic relationship that's like toxic and bloody, and there's just a lot of uncovering of grotesque horrors going on, of course, as you could imagine, with this sort of exploitation going on. And it was just like, I don't know, I think there were some kind of visceral scenes that were strong, and again, it was pacey and I was gripped, but I would recommend it for sure if that seems up your alley. But I don't know, I enjoyed it, but I still am hesitant about it because I'm like, yeah, okay, sure. So yeah, a 3-star read. And then I read yet another 3-star read, and this is a lesbian romance novel called Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail by Ashley Herring Blake, which is the second book in the Bright Fall series, because the first book was Lila Green Doesn't Care, which I read last year and I thought was cute. This book I liked less. I rated it 3 stars again. I think I rated Delilah Green 4 stars. This book, I had similar problems with it as like with Delilah Green. And me and my podcast co-host sort of talked about this because one of our listeners submitted a hot take for the segment talking about Ashley Herring Blake's writing, where like she just like doesn't really use the word lesbian, which is annoying. I feel like a lot of contemporary sapphic romances and stuff tend to do this, where they don't actually use the word lesbian, or like oftentimes a character will be a lesbian but won't be described as that, or like it'll be a lesbian romance but both the characters will be like bisexual or queer or otherwise sort of vaguely stated, or one of them will be a lesbian but the other character will be bi, which I think is what is happening here, because in this book our main character, Astrid Parker, she is like the one straight girl who in her group of like all queer girl friends, and she just like her fiance ended things with her, and she is sort of trying to get back on her feet. She has this toxic relationship with her controlling, perfect mom. She is an interior designer. She's trying to fix up this house, and there's this reality TV show that comes in, and there's like, I don't know. But what I was going to say is that it's just annoying because so few lesbian romance novels feature 2 lesbian main characters who get together, I feel like. Which is weird, because I feel like most of the lesbian couples I know in my life are both lesbians, but whatever. Anyways, that's just like a general gripe I have with the genre, I guess. But anyways, Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail. We basically follow these 2 people who have to. The other person in the dynamic is a carpenter who's sort of like a black sheep of the family. Is back in town. She's working on the house, which is her grandma's house, which is the one getting renovated for this reality TV show that Astrid is doing the renovations for. But they have beef with each other because they sort of like ran into each other before knowing that they were going to be working together, and Astrid sort of went ballistic on the other girl after she spilled her coffee on her outside of a coffee shop, because Astrid is really high strung and kind of a bitch sometimes, and she kind of has to go through an arc of like working on that, because we also see her be kind of icy and bitchy and cold in the first book as well. And so there's that. And I don't know, I just think like it was fine. It was cute. It was just a contemporary lesbian romance, and in a small town with like cutesy vibes and sort of convoluted schemes of am I gay? Do I like her? I don't want to be your experiment. But we're on a TV show together. Ooh, the tension for the reality TV is so good. But we have to pretend that I don't like your designs, but we have to pretend that like we're gonna change it, but just whatever, you know? Yeah. Okay. The next book that I read was Cult Classic by Sloane Crosley, and I enjoyed this book. I rated it 4 stars. I liked it. It was pretty interesting. It wasn't like a 5-star read, but I don't really have that many gripes about this. The way that it all played out and everything like wrapped up and came together, I was like, whoa, I was kind of gagged, to be honest. The concept here is that basically our main character is in a long-term relationship with this guy, and she's like happy with her relationship. She is talking all about like, oh yeah, things are good because of A, B, and C. Our relationship is different because we refuse to talk about our exes. Like, that's one of the hard line rules that we set, is like, we're not going to talk about any of our exes. That's not going to affect our relationship at all. They live in New York City, and that's a big major point of this book. She ends up running into every single one of her exes in New York over the course of this book. And then she used to work for like a magazine called Psychology Today or some shit like that. The guy who ran the magazine, he's now running essentially a cult in this like a health holistic care cult in this building, and she like runs into him and gets sort of involved in it because it turns out that they are running a sort of tech company scheme of her running into her exes. It's very it's very much about just like being a young woman trying to navigate relationships and figure out how to deal with all this shit, and running into the things of your past and how that affects your current dynamics and relationships. We just get a glimpse into all of these different people that she's like had different sort of dynamics with, and like she's dated so many different men, and it was really interesting and fun, I think, but also kind of like sad and like somber, but in this dry humor sort of way. Okay, the dog that's barking outside right now needs to cut that shit out, please. Anyways, yeah, enjoy this, 4 stars, and the cover is really nice. I like it. Okay, the next 2 books I finished this year, or in December, were actually books for class. The Incorporation of America by Alan Trachtenberg and America in the Gilded Age by Sean Dennis Cashman. These are both Gilded Age history books. This one is very smart. This one is kind of dumb. This is like the PBS special. This is very much focusing on like the cultural and social history of the Gilded Age, and the argument being the incorporation of like how America was becoming incorporated into this coherent, cohesive sort of thing, and what that meant for like culture and society and how that sort of evolved. So yeah, this is just for class, and we just got through the entirities of these books over the course of the semester. So I logged that on Goodreads. And yeah, if you're interested in like the history of America between post-Civil War to before World War One, you know, you should read these, I guess. I didn't rate them because, you know, I read them for class, but solid reads. And then I read another nonfiction book, which I rated 4 stars, and that was The Society of the Spectacle by Guy DeBord. I think I talked about this book in my November current nonfiction reads video. I'll put it in the cards. And again, I didn't really like the history analysis pieces of this, but I think like the cultural analysis and anti-capitalist sort of mechanisms of understanding and language and terminology and stuff that DeBord sort of offers and coins, and the sort of ideas that he brings about were solid and really interesting. And I saw a lot of very highly relevant things in our current society, and it really like opened my eyes in certain specific ways at certain points, and re-emphasize sort of my understandings of how I interact with what DeBord understands as the spectacle, and you know what that means in a world where everything becomes a spectacle, and with the ubiquity of like screens and social media and whatnot, because obviously he was writing this in like what, the mid 20th century or something, and even then the references that he makes about what culture and society looks like and how it's affecting how people interact with each other, and the relationship that has with like capitalism and the global order of things. Very interesting, I think. Solid read. Okay, and the next 5 books that I read were the comics The Magicians by Lilah Sturges. I think Lilah Sturges was the illustrator. I think it's an adaptation of a novel series or something like that. I'm not sure. But I really liked this comic series. I think I would rate it like 4 stars. I thought it was really, really interesting. Basically, there's these sort of non-traditional magic practitioners from like the real world that take a portal into a magic school setting. And at the magic school setting, weird shit starts happening. They end up taking this class where they have to learn like these defensive battle magic strategies, which is like, whoa, that's super cool. No one else gets to know that. But there's sort of some beef between the kids who go to the school who look down at these newcomers who are like, oh, you don't even know like actual magic. You just know that bullshit stuff, the spirituality stuff, and the kids who just came in, like the 3 newcomers, are all like, y'all are so up your own asses, you know. So there's that dynamic, and it's also a pretty queer comic series. Like one of the main characters is a trans girl, and this I really want volume 2 of this to come out because I want to see what happens, because like all the each sort of edition introduces another element and brings out another element of like the magic and the stakes of the relationships and the world building that I found pretty compelling and pretty interesting. So I really liked this comic series, and the art was really cool, and the character design was really solid, and the relationships these people had with each other felt really real, even though of course the fantastical element of it was like the magic and the pew pew with like, you know, their forces and whatnot. So yeah. Oh, and it was also pretty like funny. There were elements of humor that I liked. And then I read a picture book, a children's book called A Library by Nikki Giovanni. This was gorgeous, a gorgeous picture book. I love to romanticize libraries. I loved going to the library as a child, like very important experience. So very seminal, necessary experiences. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. Art was beautiful. Writing was really cute. Would definitely recommend this for, you know, the proper age range of like the children's book, the picture book, or anyone who wants to read a picture book, because I did, obviously. And then I read a new release that I feel like everyone's been reading, which is We Spread by Iain Reid. I rated this book 4 stars. I thought it was pretty solid. I liked it for, I think, a lot of the reasons that other people liked it. It was sort of unsettling, but I didn't really get that unsettling feeling until pretty late on in the book, because we're following this older woman who is feeling like a level of insecurity with her memories and her understanding what the hell is going on around her, and she doesn't know whether she can like trust herself, and she ends up going to this sort of isolated retirement home where there's only like 3 other people there, and weird stuff is happening. But I feel like it's not so much a horror novel as much as it is sort of just creepy and unsettling, but sort of quiet as well, and about sort of isolation and solitude, but solitude in togetherness, essentially, because she's never alone. She's always with these other people at the retirement home, and there's this sort of ominous figure of the woman who runs this place. She doesn't even remember agreeing to go to this home when she was younger. Her husband's been dead for many years, and she thinks about like the ramifications of her relationship with him and how she didn't really have that strong of one after a while. And she is a painter and an artist, and that is a big element of this book. She's never finished a painting or shown off a painting, essentially. She ends up sort of developing a relationship with another man at the retirement home who is a mathematician, and that was very sort of beautiful to see play out. So yeah, I think it was somewhat moving, but it wasn't deeply emotionally gripping for me. But like it was well written enough for it to be considered for me like a 4-star as opposed to like a 3-star. Because sometimes a 4-star book is like, it's well written, but it's I enjoyed it on a 3-star level. But there are some books that are like, okay, I think it's more of a 3-star book, but I enjoyed it at like a 4-star level. And you know, I don't know. It's hard to explain. It's like vibes. It's based on vibes. All right, and the next book I read in December was The Decameron Project, edited by the New York Times Magazine. There are a lot of authors in here that you are familiar with and that I'm familiar with that I really liked. You know, I thought it was pretty solid. There's these really beautiful illustrations in here before each short story. The authors that are featured in here include some people such as Victor Laval, Mona Awad, Tommy Orange, Leila Slimani, Margaret Atwood, Rachel Kushner, Charles Yu, Karen Russell. Yeah, a lot of amazing writers. I think that because this was released at the very beginning of the pandemic, it really shows like all these stories really focus, I think, thematically on that, or you know, the tension of relationships in isolation and the effects of, you know, the pandemic on everyone in different ways and in different forms. It was interesting to see what people were writing at that time, like specifically for this anthology and this collection, and I think they were all very well written and it's a very good collection. But I get why other people might not really fuck with it or enjoy it, you know, but it's beautiful and I rated it 4 stars. I would definitely pick it up if you want a short story collection that really deals with the ramifications on an emotional and social and interpersonal level of the pandemic, and that's not something that you would hate reading about. And then I read a science fiction fantasy novella called Defekt by Nino Cipri, which is the second book in the Littenverse. This novella series is sort of a parody or satire on IKEA because it's set in sort of this horror portal science fiction fantasy-esque IKEA store, and we get these like manuals and training manual video type interludes throughout the chapters that sort of reveal satirically the dystopian nature of like capitalist worker exploitation. And also in this novella was particularly interesting through the lens of the character's point of view that we're in, who is very much like a company man, like loves working for them, lives in the store in like a trailer right behind the store, like loves to clock in on time, and he ends up getting roped in to work a night shift on a special sort of thing after some weird shit happens and like he gets sick for the first time ever. And this book was so interesting. It went in so many different directions that I did not expect it to, because initially in the first couple chapters I was like, I'm a little suspect. I'm a little doubtful of this. And then it picked up and it went in directions that I was like, no, I'm fucking with this. I really like this. This is kind of brilliant and very imaginative and very fun. It was very action-packed, and the character relationships and dynamics, I don't want to spoil anything because it's a pretty short book, but of course the setting of like the Leighton store was amazing as always. So yeah, enjoyed this, rated it 4 stars. And then finally I rated the last book that I read of the year and of the month 4 stars. I rated so many books this month like 3 to 4 stars, besides the first book that I read, which was 5 stars obviously. But the last book that I read of the year was 4 Minutes by Nataliya Deleva. This book was translated from Bulgarian, and it's such a beautiful book with like a matte finish. I've been trying to read this. I've been trying to get through this for like a year, and you know, it's very short, but I finally did, and it was beautiful. We're following an orphan. Honestly, I think that the synopsis on the back does like a good job of describing this book. So I'm gonna read that and then give you like a sense of the vibes that I got from it. 4 Minutes centers around Leah, an orphan who suffered daily horrors growing up and now struggles to integrate into society as a gay woman. She confronts her trauma by trying to volunteer at an orphanage and to adopt a young girl, a choice that is frustrated over and over by bureaucracy and the pervasive stigma against gay women. In addition to Leah's narrative, the novel contains 9 other standalone character studies of other frequently ignored voices. These sections are each meant to be read in approximately 4 minutes, a nod to a social experiment that put forth the hypothesis that it only takes 4 minutes of looking someone in the eye and listening to them in order to accept and empathize with them. A meticulously crafted social novel, 4 minutes takes a difficult, uncompromising look at modern life in Eastern Europe. This is a debut novel, and it's very good, I think. It was very personal and sentimental and heartbreaking, and painted these scenes very poetically, but was also not overly like emotive about it, I guess. Like it was touching without being sort of greasy or manipulative about it, I guess. And it was a pretty stunning book, but it wasn't a 5-star read for me because it didn't have that 5-star like kick to it, I guess. But very good, and I do want to read the other books that this author writes in the future. The fact that it was translated from Bulgarian, that's cool. I don't think I've read anything from Bulgaria before. So that is all the books that I read in the month of December. I hope you had a good reading month for the last month of the year. Let me know if any of these books sound interesting to you, and also let me know if you do want to see a stats video. So yeah, that's all I have for you today. Please subscribe and like this video if you haven't already, and I will see you in my next one, hopefully soon. Bye!